Everybody, this is Aharon Solomons from Freedivers. You can find us at www.freedivers.net. I'm an AIDA instructor trainer who trains all levels of AIDA, does all levels of AIDA courses, and also specializes in training freedivers who want to do competition. This is the whole series of our chats, and it's largely provoked by an incident that happened, as we all know, in Vertical Blue this year. I have just returned from Mexico, and got this well, actually, I got the very sad news while I was still in Mexico. No, maybe even shortly after I returned.
You were in France between Mexico and Europe.
Okay. I was locked into Charles de Gaulle Airport, courtesy of Aeromexico, for 19 hours, and had some time to digest what had happened here. While I was in Mexico, actually I did get the news of it. There was a young lady training with my ex-wife, Maria Teresa, who was a very close friend of Nick, and he'd been writing to her before the terrible event happened. Before I go into any more in this story, I really want to offer my most heartfelt condolences to Nick's mother and his sisters, and know that I've lost very, very close friends in the past, and also quite a lot of members of my own family. And so I feel that I can understand their grief. And not that it'll help in the least, but we offer our most sincere condolences to them. Before I begin talking about it, actually I want to say a few things. Nothing that I say should be taken as a criticism of anything that Nick did or anybody in Vertical Blue did. Nor will I attempt to draw conclusions. We are all waiting for the AIDA committee to do that for us. We hope that it will not take over 2 years like their recommendations for a deep diving document has done, and we do hope that they will eventually lay an egg on this. In the meantime, I grant them the respect of not trying to draw the sort of conclusions that I imagine that they will draw from this. But there are certain things that may not come into their scope that I certainly want to get into, and already there have been certain things said that were, the ones I've read were right on the spot. Sarah Campbell did write a very good piece on her opinion of certain obvious things that went on here, and I can only say that I concur with it totally. So let's go into sort of impact and thoughts that it brought out. I'm not going to try and preempt anything about the autopsy, the final conclusions of the autopsy and stuff like that. I'll leave that to the experts in AIDA to manage. However, Sarah touched on one thing that I would particularly like to go into at the beginning, which was the question of overtraining. Nick had undertaken a Herculean task in trying to do all the American records in a single year. Nick had passed in nearly a single year up to the 3-figure mark in constant weight. He would fall into our definition of what we call colloquially a headbanger. Somebody who will, with great perseverance, with great purpose and strength of character, with a tremendous amount of will and a phenomenal amount of courage, pursue his path without looking either left or right. These are the people who inevitably make champions. But this is the attitude that also carries dangers on its way. Some of the champions are lucky enough to fall into the hands of great trainers who sometimes put brakes on ambition, who reinforce the idea that we need time for physiological adaptation. We may have all the pieces in place, but if we try and force the body into a mold to which it is not yet accustomed, we are inevitably going to pay the price. I'll go into that a little bit more. One of the main things in deep diving is adaptation to pressure and adaptation to depth. It's an incredibly, well, there's not been sufficient research into this, so that we have to view it from a purely subjective point of view, which means that it appears that we have certain if you like, depth triggers in our body, that when the pressure presses on you enough, at a certain point the body tends to push back, in other words, get tense. And at that point we lose our ability to equalize. We get tense, and this is the point where we should stop. And we should gradually allow the pressure triggers to recede in front of us. The body will adapt, but it requires time for adaptation. We've always said in freedivers, we have a motto about this. We need stress in order to progress. Stress, if you will, is the instigator of the whole thing. However, stress in itself does not produce results. What produces results is adaptation, physiological and psychological adaptation to stress. In other words, we're at a certain level, we try a level a little bit higher, and that creates stress. Now, if it isn't too high, the body will adapt to that amount of stress. It'll come up and meet it. And then that is okay for us, that particular level. If we have too much stress, we have what's called entropy. The body collapses. Yeah? The psychology of the thing collapses. And we either meet a wall or we even start going backwards. Too little stress, we don't have enough stimulation in order to progress. So there's a very fine balance here between too little and too much. In other words, if we don't dare enough, we don't achieve. If we dare too much, we're going to pay for it in one way or another. Now, as I said, I just came back from Mexico. Maria Teresa, my ex-wife, had a student there who happened to be a very good friend of Nick's. She received letters from him that indicated that he was depressed, he was angry with himself at his results in the competition up to that point, and he was extremely frustrated. These are all signs of overtraining. Okay, this is the first thing that I think, well, Sarah wrote about this very well. It's one of the huge dangers of the Headbanger League. Overtraining. Overtraining has catastrophic results to your psyche, to your physiology, and even to your immune system. So it can't be taken lightly. I see every day ideas about training, in pool training, that are classic cases of accepted exercises, 10 times, 12 times 50 meters with short intervals. Terrific CO2 exercise. Is it really? No, it isn't. One of the things about overtraining, I'm taking pool before I take depth, is that more is not better. Longer training is not better. The quality of your training is the most important thing, and the quality of the training should be measured simply by how specifically it's geared to achieve a certain objective. I have heard so much nonsense talked about this. We're doing CO2 tables. You don't know what the hell you're doing. Yeah. I want to get fit. What on earth does that mean? Are you doing aerobic? Are you doing lactic? Or what are you doing? Anaerobic training? What on earth are you training? What is your specific objective in doing this exercise? Oh, it feels good. I feel fitter. I feel better. Do you really? Yeah, and if you do more of it, are you gonna go on improving? There are so many mistakes today and misconceptions in training schedules that the big danger in this is that it leads to overtraining. And it leads to all kinds of things. If you're training CO2, okay, high dosages right at the beginning, which are going to train you to get contractions early on in your maximum attempts, is that a good idea? I don't think so. So actually, how do we train? Well, a lot of that is by carefully selecting the objectives that you're trying to achieve for that training session. I don't mean in terms of time, and I don't mean in terms of distance. I mean, what are you training here? Are you training lactic acid? Are you training inurement to CO2? Are you doing a style and technical session? What exactly are you training? If we look at Olympic training for swimmers today, the thing is an exact science. For freedivers, very often the training that we have has been adapted for training for swimmers. Is it effective for freediving? No, it isn't. There are an awful lot of freedivers out there who still think that they should be running huge distances each week and that the running is really doing them good because they feel fitter and they feel better. Right. If you're going to go and do another sport, it probably is beneficial to you. But specifically for freediving, look, aerobic training means that you have a sufficient supply of oxygen during the whole course of the exercise. Is that what you have in freediving? No. So why are you doing it? We should say that maybe this can form a part of a basis for people who are really unfit before they can go on to anaerobic training, which is where the whole thing is, and lactic training in particular. So we have to start thinking very much about, this is the main thing, not just accept the accepted wisdoms and go on with them. A lot of the accepted wisdoms came about because this or that elite athlete was doing it. And because he was successful, therefore we accept that as accepted wisdom. There's a catch here. I have seen many cases that elite athletes who were copied in particular techniques were successful not because of the thing that they were copied for, but they actually became successful in spite of the thing that we're doing. So without getting into particularly recommended training schedules, which is all something that is something you should work out with a good trainer and with a dialogue saying, this is what I want to achieve, because he has to have a very good knowledge of freediving and what you need to achieve in it. Without evading that question, because I would be talking for 3 hours and not 1 hour, and I can devote separate sessions to that particular thing, because I'm not in favor of hidden knowledge. Suffice it to say that the question that you must ask yourself is, where am I going with this and why am I doing it? And that's a very, very important factor. Depth training, the first thing you have to do is you have to analyze the dive. What are the things that I need in order to make a successful deep dive? What part of them can I actually train without access to deep water, which is the problem that a lot of us face, that we don't have 365 days a year access to deep water. So what can I train and how can I train to best prepare myself for the challenges of deep diving? And this needs thought about very carefully. Here's a question that this accident raised again in my horizon. I don't attempt to preempt here the conclusions of an autopsy that may be performed. But so let's cut here and say that what I'm going to say now is not specifically related to Nick at the moment. Autopsies can be quite misleading things, because very often when somebody dies in the water, the autopsy merely says drowning and doesn't go into it much more than that. Okay. But let us presume, for the sake of argument, that we've got other cases here, and I want this to be something that we consider in the future, because I see a huge danger here. We have the inherited wisdom that we've had from elite divers of today, in fact the champions of today, on the subject of air packing. Is this a technique that was good at a certain point? The originator of this technique was unquestionably Bob Croft. Bob and I discussed this a long time ago. And don't forget that Bob Croft's final record, I believe, was 73 meters. Today we've passed well beyond this point. Now, this technique might have been extremely effective at this depth. But hey, wait a minute, what is happening further down the road? We are packing more air into our lungs. Let's think about this. I really want to go into a complete picture about this. The first thing is that we are making air easily accessible to the system. Do I have to renew here, by the way? Or reset? No. Now, this, to me, puts for a certain length of time our air scavenging system on hold. What I mean by our air scavenging system, when you haven't got a tremendous volume of air in your lungs, the moment the air is depleted to the point of being non-accessible in the lungs, the system has to work harder to transport, to scavenge, and to utilize the air, the oxygen that is available, that is in the blood. Okay, that's one part of the thing. The air scavenging system is, if you like it, on hold for a certain length of time. But let's look at something else that's on hold. When we are air packing, we are hyperinflating the alveoli, the little air sacs in the lungs. On the surface of the alveoli, we have little capillaries. Now, between the capillaries and the surface of the alveoli is where we have the exchange of the gases, from the lungs to the blood and back from the blood into the lungs. Okay, let's look what happens when we're going down. We hyperinflate the alveoli before we go down. This tends to constrict, and I'm putting this as a question mark, does it tend to constrict the capillaries that are on the surface? Because if it does, it would be reasonable to suppose that this delays the onset of blood shift. Now, if the onset of blood shift is delayed, might this not be a precursor, be a possible danger for getting pulmonary edema, which is actually getting liquid into the alveoli? If we get liquid in the alveoli, we effectively drown on our own liquids. Can do. Another one of the things that can, if you like it, instigate, promote pulmonary edema is tension. And certainly in the case that we're looking at, there was tension. 63 meters, 68 meters, and a terrible descent from 63 to 80 that took 30 seconds. We're looking at severe tension here. We're looking at predisposition to tension before the dive was even begun. We understand from the facts that have come out that there was, in fact, even a lung problem, a lung squeeze in a former dive before the fatal accident. So all these things are adding up to a very gloomy picture here. So I think here are the strikes against air packing for very deep dives. Number one, is the possible danger of pulmonary edema. Number two is the unquestioned effect that we get a greater amount of narcosis earlier on. And three, for no limits dives, it moves us much closer to the area of decompression sickness. So I think before we give it a green light, there should be definite warnings coming out now, not in another 2 years from now, but now, about the dangers of this. Is it even necessary? Davide Carrera, who ventilated in this competition through a snorkel and did 100 meters plus, didn't pack air. Hey, come on, doesn't that show something? Did Umberto Pellizzari pack air for any of his dives? No. Did Francisco Ferreira's Pippin pack for any of his dives? No. Is it possible to get to the depths that we want to get to, the majority of us, except for the elite of the elite, without air packing? Definitely. It's a question of training, refining, and more refining of our techniques of equalization and inurement to pressure at depth. So we've dealt with one of the main dangers, which is overtraining. We've dealt with a danger that I think has come in, which is air packing. We're now going to talk about pressure triggers and adaptation to pressure. It takes time. If we look at a lot of the very elite divers of today, it's taken them years, not months, not weeks, years, to adapt to the pressure that they're at today. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to cut down our horizons. We have to cut down our sights. We have to cut down our aspirations. Is it possible, if I take a year off work and save like crazy to do it, that I can do 100 meters in every discipline and what have you? The answer is yes, if you want to commit suicide. It's as simple as that, guys. If you want to stand a very good chance of wrecking your health, or of even losing your life, that's the way to go. The other alternative is to look at what would be reasonable achievement, look at the people from the upper echelon who can give us superb examples of how to deal with this. I would definitely cite here Guillaume Neri. Guillaume is a person, if he doesn't feel the dive, he'll abort it. If he loses a competition because of it, or if, on the other hand, it's cost him weeks of training, that's tough. Guillaume has always had the guts to take the hard road. His development, I remember it was in Hawaii, as far as I remember, or just before it, when we had the international we had the international competition in Hawaii, that Guillaume had done a world record in constant weight of 87 meters. How long ago was that? Where is Guillaume today? And how long has it taken to get there? This is something that is critical. That we understand that it takes time. We have to be patient. We cannot attempt to blast through everything. This is not a game that we can achieve everything by force and by force of will. This will be the hardest lesson for the people who have the greatest potential. The people who have the greatest potential always have the greatest challenges. And the challenge here is to moderate their own ambition. And this is something that we're going to have to learn. Look, guys, it's no secret. I mean, 2 years ago we had in Greece a young Englishman who nearly died for not too dissimilar reasons. I saw in Dahab this summer when I was there people training who were pushing and pushing and pushing. They'd come with an ability to do 60 meters plus and wanted to do 80 or 90 meters in a month, because that's what they put as the money that they put aside, and I have to do it within that space of time. No, you don't have to do it within that space of time. Is it feasible or reasonable? No, it is not feasible or reasonable. You would be much better to choose something that was feasible and reasonable and work out a progression of what you had to do in order to achieve that. As a matter of fact, they approached a diver who I was training and said to him, hey, tell me, what do you do about lung squeezes? And he said, well, as a matter of fact, I've never had one. And as he was doing 70 plus meters in constant weights, constant weight, no fins, they were astounded. And probably even slightly disbelieving. The question wasn't, if I get a lung squeeze, what should I do? The question was, what do you do about lung squeezes like they're a normal part of a progression in depth? No, they're not. Absolutely, unequivocally not. The French, yeah, that seems to have a very good rule concerning this that I hope that they will share with the wise heads in Ada at the moment, about how many days should be taken off even after a mild lung squeeze, how far you should go back in your depth aspirations, like go back 25%, and then build up in 1 meter increments over such and such a period of time. And they seem to have got the best hold on this question so far. I do hope that they will contribute what they have to the debates that are ongoing at the moment. There are other things that I personally believe in training. A great proportion of any deep free dive, you are virtually holding your breath on empty lungs. Are you doing sufficient empty lung training? This is training a whole different set of reactions in the body, and it definitely helps in adaptation to different pressure triggers at different depths. We in breath walk, in static, in dynamic training, we train almost an equal amount of empty lung and full lung, because the amount of time that you actually have in a deep free dive, full lungs, if you're doing a really deep one, it's probably less than a third of the dive. So wouldn't you like to train the other systems as well? Too many of the we come on to the next question about equalization. One of the biggest bugbears in equalization is force. Yeah? When you're having to force an equalization, you're doing it wrong. Back off, guys. If you're losing air in your cheeks and at a shallow depth, you're not training correctly. We train in such a way that on empty lung dives, and I mean totally empty, down to residual volume, with the air that is in the cheeks that you filled on the surface with the last of your air that you breathed out. Excuse me. And then gone down with, you should be able to hold that to somewhere between 20 and 30 meters and still have a little bit of air left in the cheeks. If that is, the air is disappearing at 5 meters, your lockup needs improvement. And you need to work on this thing in empty lung dives until you've got a good lockup. Now, the next thing that you have to do is you have to bring in something where you're going, in real case, not just empty lung where you're going to 20 or 25 meters at the most, but you're actually going deep, where you have to bring in a sense of time into the thing. Because a 20-25 meter dive on empty lungs might take you less than a minute. But if you want to get take a 60 meter drop, head down, variable weight drop. We weight it in such a way that it would take the same length of time as a constant weight dive, which, let's say, just for the sake of argument, is going to take 2 minutes. So at least you are making the rhythms of equalization compatible with that kind of speed. And if you're topping up, if you need to top up, the art of topping up is do it earlier rather than later. Don't wait till you're and haven't got any air in your mouth at all, because then the tendency is to make a violent movement, and the violent movement is really an invitation to a lung squeeze. The thing is, after a certain length of time, after a certain thing, if you feel that there is a need to top up, if the cheeks are compressing, to do small top-ups after every equalization or every couple of equalizations, so that you're never in a position of having to make, and this is the key word, having to make a forceful movement at depth, requiring great force, a diaphragmic lift combined with a semi-reverse pack and all the rest of it. That's where your problem is going to be. And it should be, if you're doing your training right, completely unnecessary. As I say, we use, and I've said in the past, I don't teach. I mean, if people insist on doing it, I will try and help them as much as possible. Of doing a frenzel with full cheeks, I will try and help them as much as I possibly can. But I prefer to try and put them over to my system where you're not using your tongue. Because the trouble with the frenzel and cheek fill is simply that there are not that many people who are so totally gifted that they can keep the soft palate in a neutral position and keep the epiglottis totally closed. So the usual result is with every equalization there is a small leakage of air back into the lungs. The epiglottis opens slightly. And they're refilling at depths that are, they shouldn't have any problem with. Shouldn't have to refill as early as some of the people are beginning to refill at. Refilling later, don't misunderstand me. I'm not recommending that on a maximum dive you refill later. I say that you should train in such a way that you can do a drop on full lungs to 60 meters, yeah, and still have air at the bottom when you filled your cheeks on the surface, and not refilled anywhere on the way down. That doesn't mean to say that on a 100-meter dive I'm going to start refilling at 50 or 60 meters. I might start my topping up at 50 or something well before that. But the whole point is to have sufficient control of the epiglottis that it's not going to let you down after your topping ups. So I don't know whether I've created confusion by saying that, but you have to make a difference here between training the epiglottis to go down to at least 60 meters or 65 meters without having the necessity to refill. But that doesn't mean to say that in a deep dive, I repeat it again, yeah, that in a deep dive you're going to start refilling only at 65 meters. Yeah, the main core of the thing here is that you should not have to do something that is forceful. You should not wait until you don't have any air in your cheeks before you attempt to refill. Okay, enough said on the subject of equalization. Pressure triggers have to be handled in a very gradual and a very clever way. There are certain things that we can do to prepare us for better performance in the face of pressure triggers during the winter season and off-season. One, of course, is unquestionably stretching exercises. We have our own very, very simple routines of stretching exercises on this that we've recommended. We do not believe on packing and stretching. I think it's a very dangerous pastime. There have already been enough there have been enough serious accidents with this to say that it's not something that I would recommend. A lot of people might sit around and say, oh, you're too cautious and all the rest of it. There is one diver who is basically a pool diver who has a monumental static, who packs like crazy and stretches on packing and all the rest of it and claims that there's no risk in it, but apparently he's been doing it very gradually and adapting to it very systematically over a considerable period of time. I personally believe that if you overstretch the balloon, at some stage or other, that balloon becomes flaccid. It's like a kid's balloon. If you, before you've stretched it, yeah, it's very nice and smooth and what have you. After you've inflated it several times, it sort of hangs rather limply, and yes, it could, and sort of crinkly, and it could accept more volume of air on the first little puff. But you have stretched the thing, and you have, to a certain extent, decreased its elasticity. And I think that we don't have sufficient information yet to be able to say that yes, this is a safe practice, that we are not reducing the elasticity of the alveoli by doing it. But the ultimate question here, the ultimate one, is not whether John Willie, who's at the top of the ladder, is doing this, so let's all copy it like a band of sheep. But it should be, is it necessary? The more you know about history, the more you will understand that people in the past were achieving incredible depths and incredible performances without all this junk. So we have to be able to sort out here what is really useful to us, and this means innovative thinking. Yeah, we're really thinking outside the box and not just copying what X does. I don't want to name too many names here. Okay, he wears a nice suit and he does this, this and this, and he looks very sexy doing it, and very charismatic, and I should be doing the same thing. No. Start thinking for yourselves. He did. He didn't copy somebody else completely. He started thinking for himself. Most of the people who got somewhere were people who were thinking for themselves. It's another thing we have to begin to do. So an awful lot of what I'm talking about tonight has to do with attitude. Attitude about training. If we have the correct attitude, then we minimize the dangers of overtraining. And if we find ourselves overtraining in the least, we immediately cut back, not push harder. All these things are the sort of foundation before we get into real specifics. And I feel that this was a subject that actually Sarah Campbell touched on. It's not so much what happened here in terms of nut screws and bolts. It's what kind of attitude was going on here. And she defined the thing in the same way that I did, which was that the people who are the most driven people are the most successful people, and they are also the people who, that if they can't curb that, and if they can't harness that, are going to become very early casualties. Either by they'll reach a certain point and give up because they've had a bad experience, or they will actually do themselves harm or kill themselves. Either way, they're not going to make it in the long term, and we have to start thinking much more of the long term than the short term. Sorry guys, things are not achievable in a year. I'm sorry you've only got 2 weeks holiday. I'm terribly sorry that that's what you've got. Then not try and get your dreams in 2 weeks. Rather try to bring your aspirations down to what is realizable, realistically, within the 2 weeks or month or whatever you can allow yourself. And if you're really that driven, beyond that, change your lifestyle entirely, yeah, so that you can become a stockbroker or something, make an awful lot of money with your computer by your hand anywhere you are, and an investment counselor or something, and don't have to worry about it. Good luck with that one. But enough of the compromises. Now, the final thing that I want to reiterate that I think has to be addressed, and we have to find solutions for it. Yeah. We have quite strict ruling in ADA about blackouts, what constitutes a blackout, etc., etc. And I have no argument or tussle with this one. Maybe we have to make decisions in multiple disciplines, disciplinary competitions where somebody has had a very severe blackout. What has to be done about it? And maybe everything depends on the severity of the blackout. Just a head nodding 3 times obviously is far less severe than someone who blacks out 30 meters underwater. But I mean, these things will have to be at some stage considered for in competition. The question of getting a lung squeeze before or during a